Let her go. No one will notice. Those were the last words whispered before the splash. One moment she was a wife in silk, the next, just another secret sinking into the Caribbean night. But the sea doesn't keep secrets. It spits them back out, salt-stung and changed. Hours later, when a billionaire's yacht pulled her from the dark, she wasn't the same woman who fell. She was proof that even in betrayal, grace can rise sharper than vengeance. And when she walked back into the sunlight, alive, defiant, unforgettable, the man who betrayed her learned that some ghosts don't haunt quietly. Stay with us, because what began as betrayal ends in rebirth. Where in the world are you watching from tonight? Drop your city in the comments. Have you ever been pushed to your breaking point, left to sink, only to find the strength to rise where no one expected you to? The Aurelia Majesty sailed like a dream carved from light, her glass balconies glinting beneath the Caribbean sun. Every surface shimmered, gold railings mirrored walls, waves reflecting back the illusion of perfection. Guests strolled in linen and laughter, their champagne glasses catching the sun like tiny beacons of privilege. And among them, Lanie Nguyen walked with quiet poise, her white silk dress flowing like peace she did not feel. Her copper-brown skin gleamed against the brilliance around her, her features composed with the precision of someone who had mastered restraint. She smiled when expected, spoke softly when spoken to, and hid the tremor in her chest behind grace that felt rehearsed. Evan Monroe, her husband, walked beside her, tall, magnetic, handsome, in a way that disarmed strangers and exhausted her. His navy suit matched his curated smile, every gesture choreographed for admiration. To the world, they were elegance and empire, the picture of success at sea. But beneath the surface, Lanie could feel the fracture lines, small cracks spreading quietly beneath the weight of lies. Every time his hand brushed hers for the camera, her stomach turned with the memory of late-night whispers and the scent of another woman's perfume on his collar. That other woman was here. Callista Vane leaned against the upper deck railing, sunlight pooling around her like worship. She wore red. Not the quiet red of confidence, but the kind that dared the world to look away and failed. Her blonde hair lifted with the wind, her smile sharp and deliberate. She laughed too loudly, lingered too long near Evan, her eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of someone who had already won. The sight burned in Lanie's chest, not because of jealousy, but because of the audacity. The way betrayal could wear diamonds and sip rosé without consequence. As the ship's orchestra played soft jazz, Lanie lifted her chin, refusing to let either of them see her crack. The sea stretched endless and blue around her, whispering of escape, of truth, of the freedom that wealth could never buy. She adjusted her bracelet, the one Evan had given her after his last apology, and wondered when she had started mistaking survival for strength. Behind her, laughter echoed, his followed by hers, and the sound carried like salt in an open wound. She turned away from the sun, from them, from the version of herself that still waited to be chosen. Somewhere deep inside, a decision began to form, small, fierce, and unstoppable, the first ripple in a storm she didn't yet know was coming. Dinner unfolded like theater, the chandeliers above swaying to the rhythm of the sea while violins hummed beneath the low murmur of conversation. The dining hall gleamed with silver and candlelight, each reflection stretching across polished crystal and white linen like a lie told too beautifully to question. Lanie sat beside Evan, her posture flawless, her expression carved from poise. The scent of truffle and salt mingled in the air, but all she could taste was restraint. Across from her, Callista Vane sparkled in crimson silk, a ruby flame among muted tones. The gown clung to her curves like sin wrapped in luxury, and her smile carried that familiar edge, The kind meant to be seen, meant to draw blood. Evan lifted his glass, the gold watch on his wrist catching the light, his tone charming as ever. "To new beginnings," he said. Callista's laughter followed, smooth and deliberate. "And to love that dares to be seen." The words landed like a blade coated in honey. For a heartbeat, the room froze. Silverware paused mid-air. A whisper of surprise rippled down the table. Then came the laughter, brittle, uncertain, the kind people use to excuse cruelty when it's dressed as courage. Lanie's fingers tightened around her glass until her knuckles whitened. The stem trembled, catching the chandelier's reflection, fragile as the mask she wore. Her gaze found Callista's, steady, unflinching. There was no panic in her eyes, only clarity, a sharp, calm recognition that this was not humiliation. It was revelation. The truth had finally shed its disguise. Evan's hand brushed her arm under the table, a warning disguised as affection, but she didn't flinch. She didn't speak. She simply exhaled, slow and deliberate, reclaiming her power in silence. The orchestra's melody shifted to something low and mournful. Around them, conversations resumed, whispers cloaked in politeness. Someone refilled her glass. Someone else laughed too loudly to erase discomfort. The world kept spinning as if betrayal wasn't sitting at the table in a red dress and diamond earrings. Lanie rose, graceful as ever, napkin folded neatly on her plate. "Excuse me," she said softly, her voice even, composed, devastatingly polite. No one stopped her. No one dared. Evan's eyes followed, unease flickering where arrogance had lived. Callista smirked, but only until Lanie passed, her perfume trailing like quiet defiance. As the dining room blurred behind her, Lanie walked toward the open deck, her heels echoing like a clock ticking down to something inevitable. The sea called to her, vast, merciless, and free, the only witness worthy of what came next. The night air wrapped around her like a secret, thick, salty, unrelenting. The laughter and clinking glasses from the dining room had faded into the hum of the ocean, replaced by the low rhythm of waves striking metal. Lanie gripped the railing, her reflection trembling in the black water below. The moon hung low, full and merciless, casting the deck in a cold silver glow. For the first time that evening, she let her shoulders drop. The mask of poise cracked, if only for a breath. Then came the sound of footsteps, uneven, impatient. Evan's voice drifted through the darkness, slurred at the edges. "You just can't let anything go, can you?" His words stumbled like he did, fueled by champagne and cowardice. Lanie didn't turn. "Let go," she said quietly. "That seems to be your specialty." Her tone was calm, too calm, and that steadiness enraged him more than shouting ever could. He stepped closer, his reflection merging with hers in the glass rail. "You think you're better than me? You think standing there pretending to be perfect makes you the victim?" His breath reeked of guilt masked as arrogance. "I don't have to pretend," she replied, eyes still fixed on the horizon. "You did that for both of us." He flinched, a flicker of something, fear, shame, maybe both, flashing across his face before another voice cut through the dark. "Maybe you two should take this inside," Callista purred, her silhouette materializing from the shadows like smoke. The red of her dress glowed faintly under the deck lights, a warning flare in human form. She leaned against the railing, every movement deliberate. "Evan, she's making a scene." Lanie turned then, her expression unreadable. "The scene, Callista, began the moment you stepped onto this ship." For a heartbeat, silence stretched taut between them. Then something ugly twisted behind Callista's smirk. "You don't belong in his world," she said softly, stepping closer. "Some of us were made for this life." Some of us just marry into it and hope it doesn't spit us out. The wind surged. The sea roared below. Lanie's fingers brushed the railing again, cold steel, slippery with mist. She met Callista's gaze one last time, unflinching. "Then I hope you enjoy it," she said, voice low and steady. The shove came swift, cruel, deliberate, a gasp, a slip of silk, and then silence. The ocean accepted her without protest, swallowing the splash like a secret. For a moment, Callista stood frozen, chest heaving, before the waves smoothed themselves as if nothing had happened at all. The night went on, indifferent, as Lanie Nguyen vanished into the dark. The water was colder than she imagined, an instant shock that ripped the air from her lungs and replaced it with silence. Darkness pressed against her from every direction, the salt stinging her eyes as she kicked upward, desperate for air, for light, for anything. The moon shimmered above, distant and unreachable, like a coin tossed into the sky by careless gods. When she finally broke the surface, the Aurelia Majesty was already gliding away, her golden lights shrinking against the horizon. Lanie gasped, calling out, but her voice was devoured by wind and waves. Panic surged, wild and primal. Then, instinct took over. She treaded water, forcing her mind to focus, to count her breaths, to survive. Somewhere on that ship, they were laughing. Evan, Callista, their guilt disguised as denial. Maybe they thought she couldn't swim. Maybe they thought no one would ever know. But Lanie refused to let the sea write her ending. Her mother once told her that water remembers everything, that it carries truth in its depths. And as the current tugged her farther from the lights, she whispered into the darkness, "Then remember me." Hours blurred into fragments. Her limbs ached, each stroke heavier than the last. The salt burned her throat, exhaustion crept into her bones. Somewhere far off, thunder murmured, a storm building on the horizon. The waves grew rougher, tossing her like a forgotten prayer. But still, she fought. She thought of every lie she had swallowed, every smile she had faked to keep peace in a marriage built on deceit. Now there was no one left to perform for, just her, the sea, and the relentless will to live. When she saw the light, she thought it was a hallucination. A single beam sweeping across the black water, cutting through the chaos. Then came a sound, a distant hum, mechanical and steady. A yacht. Its searchlight widened, catching the glint of her arm as she raised it weakly above the waves. A voice shouted, urgent and sharp, followed by the splash of a lifebuoy hitting the water. Hands reached for her, firm and sure, pulling her from the edge of nothingness. She collapsed onto the deck, coughing seawater, trembling so violently she couldn't speak. A blanket wrapped around her shoulders, the scent of cedar and rain filling her senses. And then, through the blur of motion, she saw him. Tall, composed, his dark eyes assessing her not with pity, but with recognition. Xaden King, the billionaire whose name carried weight in every corner of the world, now standing before her in the glow of the searchlight. Their eyes met for the briefest moment, and the world stilled. He nodded once, as if she were not a stranger, but someone long expected. "You're safe now," he said quietly. But even as he spoke, she realized safety wasn't what she'd found. It was a reckoning, and she had just been reborn from the sea. The world around him narrowed to the rhythm of her shallow breaths. Water pooled around her on the teak floor as the crew stepped back, waiting for his next order. Xaden knelt beside her, his expression unreadable. He had seen the ocean take men twice her size and strength, but something about her, this fragile, fierce stranger, made him feel the rarest thing of all: urgency. Her hair, dark as wet silk, clung to her face. Her lips were pale, trembling, yet her brow remained smooth, defiant even in unconsciousness. He brushed a strand from her cheek, studying the quiet rise and fall of her chest. "Get her below deck," he said at last, his tone calm but cutting. "And make sure she stays alive." The crew moved swiftly, lifting her with care. As they disappeared into the corridor, Xaden remained at the rail, eyes fixed on the horizon. He had spent years navigating storms of power and greed, building empires from other people's ruin. But this felt different. The sea had never delivered him something so human. When he finally followed them below, the yacht hummed softly around him, its heartbeat steady and sure. He found her in the guest cabin, wrapped in linen and silence. A medic checked her vitals, muttering something about dehydration and shock. Xaden stood in the doorway, hands clasped behind his back, watching as her eyelids fluttered open. She blinked, disoriented, her gaze finding the ceiling first, then the stranger watching her like a question. Her voice, faint but steady, slipped out between breaths. "Where am I?" "Safe," he said simply. His voice was deep, smooth as tempered glass. She frowned, trying to piece together what had happened. "The ship, You fell," he said, sparing her the cruelty of the truth. "But you were found." He didn't tell her that no fall looked like hers, that she had the marks of hands that had pushed, not gravity that had pulled. Lanie tried to sit up, but her body betrayed her, trembling with exhaustion. Xaden stepped forward without hesitation, his hand hovering just above her shoulder, close enough to offer strength, far enough to respect her pride. "Rest," he said. "The sea's taken enough from you tonight." Her eyes met his then, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition neither could name. She studied his face, the sharp lines softened by moonlight filtering through the window. "Who are you?" she whispered. He gave a faint, almost reluctant smile. "Someone who rebuilds what others break." For the first time in hours, she exhaled fully. The ocean roared softly beyond the hull, steady and forgiving. And in that quiet, under a sky stitched with stars, two worlds, one lost, one found, collided. Morning light filtered through the porthole, washing the cabin in gold. The air smelled faintly of salt and cedar, a reminder that she was still at sea, still suspended between what had been and what was yet to come. Lanie lay still for a long time, tracing the fine stitching on the linen sheet, grounding herself in something tangible. The memories came in fragments: the dinner, the argument, the shove, and then the water swallowing her whole. Her throat tightened, but no tears came. She had shed enough for a lifetime. This time she simply breathed. When the door opened, Xaden stepped inside with the quiet assurance of a man used to commanding silence. He carried a tray, tea, fruit, something warm beneath a silver lid. "You should eat," he said, setting it down. His voice was steady, unyielding, but not cold. She sat up slowly, the silk robe draped over her shoulders, slipping slightly as she turned to face him. "I don't even know who you are," she said. Her voice cracked, but her gaze didn't waver. "Xaden King," he replied, the name sounding heavier in the small space. "You were found 3 nautical miles off the coast. My crew pulled you out." Her fingers brushed the rim of the teacup, tracing its warmth. "Why?" He studied her for a moment before answering. "Because someone had to." It was simple, but it was everything. No pity, no grand rescue speech, just truth. Lanie sipped her tea, the heat grounding her as she searched his face for any hint of the curiosity that lingered in the crew's eyes. But Xaden didn't look at her like a victim. He looked at her like someone who had survived something that mattered. Later, when the medic came to check on her, Lanie insisted on walking to the upper deck. Her legs trembled with each step, but she refused help. The world outside dazzled, blue stretching endlessly, the yacht cutting through sunlight like a blade. The crew paused as she passed, respectful, curious. She met their eyes and offered a small nod as if to say, "I'm still here." Xaden watched from the helm, hands resting on the rail. She moved differently now, not fragile but deliberate, as if every step were a declaration. When she reached the bow, she stood against the wind, eyes fixed on the horizon. "They left me to drown," she said when he joined her. "But I learned to float." The words lingered between them, soft yet indestructible. For the first time in years, Xaden smiled. Not the practiced kind reserved for boardrooms, but something real, something human. And as the sea glittered beneath them, Lanie realized she hadn't just survived. She had begun again. By the third morning, the world beyond the horizon began to stir with whispers. The Aurelia Majesty had docked in St. Kitts under the shadow of a missing person report. And though Evan Monroe smiled for cameras, his eyes betrayed the unease of a man waiting for the tide to turn against him. Callista Vane hid behind oversized sunglasses, her red lips pressed into a performance of worry. "She fell," Evan told the reporters. "It was an accident. But the sea, merciless and eternal, had a way of bringing truth back to shore, on." The Mariner's Grace. Xaden watched the coverage from his private cabin, every flicker of Evan's face reflected in the dark glass of the monitor. The lies were too polished, too rehearsed. He knew men like Monroe, men who mistook wealth for immunity. "Find them," Xaden said into the phone, his tone a quiet command, "and make sure the world finds out what really happened." His reach stretched beyond borders. Shipping magnates, senators, journalists. By nightfall, the investigation that Evan hoped would fade had found new life, driven by a billionaire who didn't forgive cruelty. Lanie didn't ask what he was doing. She didn't have to. She saw it in his stillness, the way his gaze lingered on the waves, as if listening to something only he could hear. Each day she grew stronger. She rose earlier, ran laps on the deck, let the wind bite her skin until she no longer felt fragile. Her body remembered fear, but her spirit refused it. When she looked at her reflection in the mirrored glass, she barely recognized the woman staring back. The bruises had faded, but her eyes, dark, steady, alive, carried a new kind of fire. That evening, Xaden joined her on the bow. The sea burned orange under the dying sun, and for a long moment they stood without words. "They're looking for you," he said finally. "Your name's everywhere." "Good," she replied. "Let them see I didn't sink." He turned toward her, a faint smile ghosting his lips. "You're not what I expected." "I'm not what they expected either," she said, her hair whipping across her face, her voice steady as the wind. Below deck, a crew member appeared, holding out a phone. "Sir, you'll want to see this." The screen showed Evan Monroe's face again, but this time, the headline told a different story. "Husband under investigation after wife's disappearance." Lanie met Xaden's eyes. The storm had turned, and for the first time since the night she fell, the world was finally catching up to the truth. The pier shimmered beneath the Bahamian sun, white yachts lined like pearls against turquoise water. The air buzzed with salt, tension, and camera shutters. Reporters had gathered at the private marina under the guise of an investor event, but what they found was a resurrection. When the Mariner's Grace eased into its berth, a hush rolled over the crowd. Xaden King stepped out first, immaculate in a cream suit, presence commanding without a word. Then, as if emerging from the horizon itself, Lanie Nguyen appeared. Her white linen dress fluttered in the sea breeze, her skin glowing with a calm that seemed otherworldly. Every head turned. Phones lifted. The whispers came first. Then the collective realization that the woman thought lost to the ocean was walking on solid ground again. Evan Monroe stood frozen at the end of the pier, color draining from his face. His hand, once steady in boardrooms and interviews, now trembled visibly. Callista Vane, beside him, flinched as though she'd seen a ghost. Lanie didn't break her stride. Each step was deliberate, soundless but deafening in its impact. Cameras clicked like gunfire. The journalists surged forward, questions spilling over one another. "Mrs. Monroe, were you pushed? Did you survive alone at sea? Who saved you?" She didn't answer any of them. She didn't need to. Her silence was the story. Evan tried to compose himself, forcing a hollow smile. "Lanie," he managed, voice cracking. "Thank God you're alive. I've been worried sick." The lie collapsed beneath its own weight. She stopped a few feet away, the distance between them more powerful than any confrontation. "Were you?" she asked softly, and the words sliced through the noise like wind through silk. Behind her, Xaden stepped forward, not possessive, not protective, simply present. The cameras shifted to him instantly, the billionaire whose reach was legend, the man now standing beside the woman the world had nearly erased. "Miss Nguyen has been under my care since the night she was rescued," he said, his voice smooth but edged with command. "She's here today to share her truth, when she's ready. For now, all that matters is that she's alive." Callista's composure cracked. She turned sharply, sunglasses hiding nothing. "This is insane," she hissed to Evan, but the microphones caught it. Gasps followed. The spell of their facade broke cleanly in the humid air. Lanie looked past them, toward the horizon, the same horizon that had once threatened to swallow her. Now it looked like freedom. She didn't need revenge. This was enough. Her story was no longer whispered between shadows of deceit. It was standing in sunlight, and the world was finally listening. The world awoke to her name. Headlines flared across every screen. Her image, her story, her survival. Black woman thrown overboard by husband's mistress, rescued by billionaire. Talk shows dissected it, tabloids romanticized it, and think pieces claimed her as a symbol of resilience, justice, race, and power. But while the world debated her meaning, Lanie Nguyen simply watched the ocean breathe. The water shimmered under the early light, gentle now, as if the sea itself had chosen to cradle her instead of claim her. On the balcony of the Mariner's Grace, she stood barefoot, a linen robe cinched loosely around her waist, the wind teasing strands of hair free. Behind her, Xaden approached quietly, a mug of coffee in one hand, his presence unintrusive but grounding. He handed it to her without a word, the gesture as steady as the tide. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The hum of the yacht, the low roll of waves, and the distant cry of gulls filled the silence between them. "You know," Xaden said at last, his voice low, "people are calling you the woman who rose from the water." Lanie's lips curved faintly. "People call things what they need to understand," she murmured. "I didn't rise. I just refused to sink." She took a sip, eyes fixed on the horizon, where sunlight painted a path across the sea. "They think this story ends here, but I'm just beginning." Xaden studied her for a moment, the breeze tugging at the open collar of his shirt. "You could disappear, you know, leave it all behind. I can make that happen." She turned toward him, her gaze steady, unflinching. "No," she said softly. "I won't hide from the life they tried to erase. They'll see me live. That's how they'll remember me." He nodded, a quiet respect flickering in his eyes. "Then live," he said simply. Below deck, a television murmured. Clips of Evan Monroe being escorted through airport terminals, Callista Vane shielding her face from cameras, The empire of appearances they'd built was crumbling in real time, brick by deceitful brick. Yet Lanie didn't gloat. She felt no satisfaction in their downfall, only release. As the morning deepened, she placed her cup on the rail, the steam rising like the last ghost of her old life. The sea stretched infinite before her, the same sea that had tried to end her, now carrying her forward. When Xaden stepped back inside, Lanie lingered, letting the wind wash over her. She closed her eyes, feeling the rhythm of the waves echo in her chest. Once, she had drowned in silence. Now she breathed in freedom, and as the sun broke across the horizon, setting the water ablaze, she smiled, not as a survivor, but as a woman reborn. If you liked this story, share it. Somewhere there's a woman who was betrayed, silenced, or replaced, and she needs to know her story isn't over just because they walked away. Comment below if you've ever been counted out, only to return standing taller, stronger, and shining brighter than the ones who tried to sink you. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, drop a comment, and share it with a friend. And don't forget to subscribe to Black Stories Untold for more stories that uncover hidden struggles, celebrate strength, and remind us that every voice matters.